Right now, so Nick, I'm going to shift here. So we have 30 minutes here. I'm thinking that what we should do now is probably tell the news. We have one, two, okay.
And I can go through a couple of the comments that were super
Yeah,
interesting too.
why don't you do that while I read through this real quick?
So clearly super fans in the house, right? It was funny, about 50% could kind of tell that it was the lamp story.
Yep.
They obviously loved it.
Yep.
One of the cool comments I saw was from Amy. I did not ready my crying towel for this event.
Is that Amy Owen?
I'm not sure, just first names on this one.
Shout out to Amy Owen. I know you're in here.
And then Andrea, this story lives in my head rent free. So
Yeah.
she says. And then a few, I would love to buy a Lungi plushie.
Which has nothing to do with the
Nothing
story.
to do, which is great. And then a bunch of comments about why aren't you doing more live events? Why can't they be around a fire or
Yeah.
a
Well, hey,
fire in Nash National Park?
Truthfully, I mean, I said it in the marketing, and obviously Nick and I and our whole team talks about this. We think that the best environment for these types of stories would be like I don't know logistically how you do it, but like a camping retreat of sorts, where literally we're around a fire or something. There's just something special about live storytelling. In fact, before this show, Nick and I were, he was hyping me up for this, we're chatting about what's going to happen. And we were just talking about the difference between like reading from a script, like blatantly reading from a script, which is like acting, versus true storytelling. And the difference is like the words change often. If you're storytelling and you tell the same story, that Mitch story I just told you, I've told it multiple times and it changes each time. I wrote a script for it, but I tell it differently each time because storytelling is really about emotions. It's about me feeling a certain way and communicating those emotions to the people that are listening and who are participating. Whereas script reading it lacks emotion. And so I would imagine with like a live setting around a fire, like the vibes would be so good, and that kind of emotional connection and community feel, frankly, that we have in the comments here. I think we could probably get 4,500 people around a fire. What do you think, dude?
Oh, dude, hands down, hands down.
So
national park setting, campfire.
Yeah, dude.
I mean, it'd be and former Navy SEALs, so they'll all be
There we
safe
go,
and,
dude.
and
Safe.
protected. So
safe as can be. All right, so we're gonna go on to the next story. This one's okay. So this one has. I'm gonna go ahead and give you the warning now. This next story, it's called Shattered Glass. It's new. It's not been covered on any platform, and it's graphic. That's the deal. So it's graphic. So give you a second there if you want to put earmuffs on people that need earmuffs. That's an old school reference for those in the know. All right, here we go. It's ironic that I just talked about storytelling needs to be a purely emotional thing and no script reading, but I am going to just quickly look at the opening here just to make sure I'm on pace here. All right. Here we go. So this story is called Shattered Glass. So on Thanksgiving morning in 1900, an 18-year-old named Thomas Pedler told his mother that he was going out for the afternoon and he would be back in time to grab some turkey that afternoon at dinner. And then he grabbed his coat and his jacket and he ran out the door. And so Thomas, he lived in a working class neighborhood in San Francisco, California. Again, this is 1900. And in this neighborhood, nothing really exciting happened ever. But this day, on Thanksgiving Day in 1900, there was going to be this huge football game between Stanford University and California State University. And it was going to be played at this stadium in the district where he lived. So the stadium is right near his house. And so this was the big to-do. This was the big game. And that was what Thomas was going to go participate in that day. And so he leaves his house and he runs to the front gates of the stadium and he meets his friend Charles. And Charles is also a young man, and neither of them had the $1 that you would need to be admitted into the stadium. But when they got there at 11 a.m. that morning, kickoff, the start of the game, was not until 2:30 p.m. But already at 11 a.m., just from the outside looking in, the stadium was completely packed. I mean, so packed that basically no one was even being able to walk through the kind of entrance hall into their seats. And so Thomas and Charles are thinking, well, even if we sneak in somehow, where are we going to sit? There's nowhere to sit. Everyone's taller than us. So they decide we can't it's pointless to sneak in. And so they begin thinking about their other options, because that was their plan A, was just to find a way to sneak in with the crowd and watch the game, which they had done before with other events. And so they looked around, and there's this huge fence around the outside of the stadium, huge fence, chain link fence. And there were certain parts of this fence where there was kind of like a vantage point into the field if you climbed up and hung on the fence. But all the best spots on this fence were taken up with other, young people that had decided, or just people who had decided to watch the game from those spots. And so that was ruled out because basically they had nowhere they could go on the fence where they would get a view. And so they're thinking, what are they going to do? How are they going to watch this game? This is the big happening. This is the thing that everybody's doing. We got to find a way to watch. And so they turn away from the stadium and they look across the street, and there's this brand new factory, this beautiful white brick factory. And Thomas and Charles, they see there's like this gaggle of people that have begun kind of flocking to this building. Now there's loads of people out on the street, so this is not like the only place where people are going. But what drew their attention was they saw that these people going to this building were literally placing ladders up against the sides of this building. And they were climbing the building, this 5-story building. And they would climb the ladders and then grab windows, and they'd grab the fire escapes, and they're climbing to the top. And, Thomas and Charles, they see this, they look up, and they can see why. The roof of this beautiful factory, this huge factory, is flat. It's big, it's flat, and it's got this perfect view down onto the field. And so without any hesitation, Thomas and Charles, they leave the stadium, they run across the street, and they join the group climbing up the ladders and climbing this building. And, as they're doing this, which is obviously horribly dangerous, the few factory workers that were there are like yelling to these people, hey, don't go up there, but no one's paying any attention to them. It's a total like chaos. And so Thomas and Charles, they make it up to the roof. They climb 55 feet to the top of this building. And when they get up there, it wasn't totally packed yet. And so they were able to run right over to the edge of this building, perfect view into the field. This is the primo seating, better than in the stadium. And so they get there sometime after 11, 11:30 maybe. I don't know how long it took them to get to the top, but they get up there shortly after 11. And by 2:30 p.m., when Thomas and Charles heard kickoff, the whistle and the game begins, the crowd roars. By that point, there were hundreds of people that had made the journey to the top of this roof of this factory. And so the place is packed. It's like very dangerous because there's no railings on the side of this roof. It's just like a slab at the top. But Thomas and Charles, they're loving it. And, as the game is going on, the crowds in the stadium were so raucous and so loud. I mean, each of the teams had their own band, and each of the bands were kind of like competing with each other to make the most noise, and the fans were really buying into it. And so the fans in the stadium are going crazy, and the fans up on this factory, including Thomas and Charles, are also, going mad, and everyone's chanting and screaming and yelling. And so it's incredible. Thomas and Charles, they're having such a good time. 20 minutes into the game starting. So the game started at 2:30. At 2:50, Thomas and other people up there heard a dull cracking sound from somewhere on the other side of the roof that they were on. And so Thomas and likely Charles turned and looked, and it's a sea of people. Everyone's like right up against each other. But even through this sea of people, they could see somewhere on the other side of this roof, there was a group of people on that side where this cracking sound was coming from, clearly trying to evacuate, trying to get off the roof. People are yelling, and they're kind of like jumping to get off the side of this roof. Not literally, they're not jumping to the ground, but to get onto the fire escapes to get off. And then before Thomas, Charles, and anybody else could really even figure out what exactly was happening that was causing that, a much louder cracking sound just roared across the roof as the roof collapsed underneath all of these people, including Thomas and Charles. And so Thomas and Charles and all these people are thrown into free fall as they're falling into this factory. And Thomas, miraculously, when he fell, he only fell like a few feet. It was like where he fell, he landed right on one of these wooden beams, these big wooden beams that run from, across the whole, like cross sections of beams that run the whole distance of the factory, near the ceiling. And so he fell like a few feet. He wasn't hurt at all, and he was able to grab the beam. And he's hearing people hitting the ground below, 55 feet below. And, he's in this total horrible situation, and he looks, and he sees that also apparently, or I would say initially, miraculously, he sees that there's actually this brick structure, if you will, in the middle of this factory. So the factory basically is this huge thing, 55 feet tall, and housed in this factory. There's no floors in this factory. It's just a big space. In the middle of it is this brick structure. It almost looks like a mini other factory inside of the factory. It's got a slightly curved top. And the top of this brick structure inside of this factory was maybe 10, 15 feet below where the roof was. So here's Thomas. He's fallen like, call it less than 5 feet onto this beam. He's grabbed the beam. He's holding himself on. His friend, Charles, was one of the, again, initially, Thomas is thinking this is lucky. Charles was one of the people that landed on the top of this brick structure. And so, there's 20 some odd people, 15, 20 some odd people that land on this brick structure. The rest have fallen and they've hit beams along the way, 55 feet down. And so Thomas is likely looking over at Charles on this brick structure thinking, oh, good. He'll survive that. That's 10, 15 feet down. That's a fall you can survive. But as Thomas likely looked over at Charles, who had landed on his feet first and then kind of fallen onto his hands, Charles and the other people that landed on this other potential saving grace, this brick structure, began screaming louder than anybody else. I mean, there are people that are horribly disfigured that have fallen 55 feet, smashed into beams, that are clinging to life. That's just happened. Dozens of people, literally hundreds. But the people on this brick structure was a different thing altogether. It was a piercing scream. It was gut-wrenching. It was the worst scream you could ever imagine. And worse than that is, in addition to screaming, their bodies began making these loud snapping sounds. These popping, snapping sounds were just coming out of them, and they all began contorting forward. Like uncontrollably, their bodies began warping forward, almost like a rolled-up bug. It would turn out this factory was not just some factory. It was a glass factory. They made glass inside of this factory. And in simple terms, to make glass, you need to heat sand and some other chemicals up to unbelievably hot temperatures. To put it in perspective, it needs to be hotter than lava. So you need to have a furnace that's so hot, it's hotter than melting rocks. That's how hot it is. And this brick structure in the middle of this factory was a furnace, and it was on. And so obviously the inside of the furnace, which is like 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit or whatever it is the hottest part. But the exterior, the outside that these guys have all landed on, is so hot that the people who work these types of furnaces, they can't stand anywhere near these furnaces. They have these long metal poles they use to work the flames and work the glass. Even with protective equipment, it's like this totally dangerous thing just to be near this furnace. And Charles and the others, they've landed their skin, their body, everything on these bricks. And that snapping sounds those snapping sounds was the sound of their bodies like immediately catching fire. But they burned so fast that they were fully alive, fully awake as they are burning alive on top of this furnace. And so Thomas is watching as his friend is burning alive and shrieking horribly until finally Charles balled up so much from burning that he literally began to roll down the curved side of this furnace into one of the openings. And so he literally rolled and actually entered the furnace. And it was when he went into the furnace that his screaming stopped. And so there's this horrible scene playing out. Thomas is saved in a sense, except he's burning up. The inside of this factory is super hot, and he's starting to sweat. He's losing his grip, and in a horrible twist of fate, outside, people had heard about what was happening inside of the furnace, all this commotion. Not everyone, but some people had. One of them was Thomas's father. And so Thomas's father runs into this factory with the collapsed roof, and he sees there's all these people that are dead and dying. There are people shrieking on this furnace, and he sees his son's final moments. Thomas would lose his grip on the beam, and his dad would watch him land on the furnace, feet first. He tried to stay upright. He fell forward onto his stomach and his face, and he burst into flame. And so all told, 23 people, let me confirm that. All told, 23 people, including Thomas and Charles, died from falling into the factory, and dozens more were horribly injured and disfigured. It goes down today as one of the worst sporting event disasters of all time. But despite that, that day, because of how loud the crowds were, even though there's this horrible tragedy happening literally maybe 100 feet outside of the stadium, they didn't notice the people in the stadium. And so that game played to the end, and it wasn't until after the game was over that fans had this kind of spontaneous parade where they carried the winning team out into the streets, that they saw these charred bodies of people that had burned alive on top of this furnace. And so just so you know, that was part of a top 3 places you can't go, and people who went anyways that has not come out yet. And so you heard it first. That was a news story that was exceptionally graphic. Over to you, Nick, for comments and reactions.
Yeah, so Ian, we have Mr. Ballen. I've been watching you since I was 11. I'm 14 now. Your stories still bring me joy. Thank you.
There you go.
And then a Burning Ballen Festival camping trip coming to you soon, someone said.
Like
and
Burning
then,
Man.
A lot of stuff about Bailey Sarian, so it sounds like we have some Bailey Sarian fans in the house that are also Ballen fans. So
there we go.
And also the new term Super Ballers is now flooding the internet, apparently.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we kind of have a decision point here because it's 8:50. Nick/team here. What do you think about me shifting to the finale now? There's one other story that would put us probably literally 45 minutes over. What do you? I'm gonna shift. I'm gonna go to the finale.
Yeah, dude, the personal story's great.
And to be honest, like the one we're skipping over, it's one that's been done. For the record, guys, it's the one about there's this wildland firefighter. The story's called The Witch, and in fact, anyways, we'll put it out on Reddit or something where the link is. But basically, it's this wildland firefighter. He goes into this to fight this fire with his crew, and he's told to do a reconnaissance ahead. Basically, take this ATV, drive ahead deep into the forest, and see how far the fire has spread to get a sense of if we should spread out or not. And over the course of driving out alone, he encounters this bobcat, and bobcats are notoriously elusive and don't go near people, but this bobcat was really interested in him and began making these strange sounds. He drove past it. He arrived at a cabin that, it looked abandoned, but there was this fresh chain on the front door locking it in place, which meant someone had been here recently. Also, this is federal land, and so Mike is the firefighter. He's thinking, why is there a private residence or what looks like a private residence here? That doesn't make any sense. He looks inside and he sees all the furniture, because there's a hole in the door, and he sees all the furniture inside of this cabin is flipped upside down for no reason. There's no one there. And then he gets spooked, so he finishes his reconnaissance and decides to just drive back up the logging road back to his crew, and he would encounter a woman standing in the road who is just wearing this tattered dress. She's barefoot. She's blocking his way. She's standing in the same spot where the bobcat was. And then at some point she screams, and it sounds identical to the scream, so to speak, that the bobcat had let out on the way in. And then she's scattered, like she runs up into a tree and perches and kind of watches him as he speeds out. And so after this exchange, he tells his firefighter crew, they all want to go back, but they say it's a bad idea. And so, they wind up fighting the fire. But a couple of days later, Mike is back in this area, not in the forest, but in the town nearby. And he's in a bar, and he strikes up a conversation with a local. And the local, after being asked, hey, Mike asks the local, is there anybody have any houses out in this property? It's federal land, like they shouldn't. Do you know of anyone living out there? And the local would say, oh, no one lives out there. But, growing up, we were always scared to go in the woods because there were rumors about there being a witch who lived out there who apparently had a bobcat for a pet. And so that's the story, the super fast story. I felt bad not even saying it. So that was like the 4-minute version of it. It's a very creepy story when told full, but we don't have time for it. So there you go. That was the micro version. It's called The Witch, and actually I can give you the exact name of the story. It's called, on YouTube, it's called Top 3 Scariest Forest Encounters, and the name of this story, because it's a top 3, is The Witch. Okay, last story. It's 8:52, so saddle up for more than an hour here. Not this story, but in total. This story is my personal story. This is literally the story that like kicked off my YouTube career. For a while I was doing TikToks, as many of you loyal, incredible super ballers out there know. But I made the shift to YouTube, and like literally the first story that I did was this one. And if you watch this video on YouTube, you'll see there's virtually no editing. It's just me telling this story. I will say that the most important part about this story is to understand that prior to this thing happening to me, I had never had any experience, even though I wanted to. I think some of us want this in our lives. I wanted to have like a paranormal experience, but I never had. And then after this experience, I never had anything after it. Like now, I'm desperate to have something crazy happen because then I can tell the story about it. But this is it. This is the one time that something I would call potentially paranormal happened to me. This story, it F's with me, for lack of a better description. It's not an act. When I think about this story, this was tough to go through. I got to be honest. This was something. I guess trauma is the word for it. But for the sake of this show, I'm going to tell it again. Okay, and I'll try to do it relatively quickly, but I'm not known for concision here. So here we go. So in 2004, and also I guess I should say this. This is legitimately my recollection of what happened. This is not an act. This is a true story, as I recall it. Last point. Here we go. In 2004, I was 16 years old, and I was an avid snowboarder. I grew up in Boston, Massachusetts, Quincy, Mass, for my locals that are from Quincy potentially watching this. Maybe Dan Ballen, Joe McCormick. I don't know if you're on here. Shout out to you. My family. Anyways, so there was only one place to go snowboarding really in near Boston, and it was Blue Hills. I was a snowboarding instructor there for a number of years when I was like 13, 14, 15. But like there wasn't much going on there. It's to call it a mountain is a joke. We laughed because it was literally called Blue Hills. It's like this hill. It's not really a ski resort. But the people I always snowboarded with at Blue Hills and kind of broadly speaking were two of my very closest friends they're actually both named Nick, but one of them I nicknamed Wolf. And so for the story, Wolf. So there's Nick and there's Wolf. And so we always snowboarded together all the time. And every winter from the time I was 12 through to 16, so 4 winters in a row, we would always make a trip up to New Hampshire where there were real mountains to snowboard and ski on, where Nick's family owned a ski cabin. And the ski cabin, it was like the quintessential ski cabin. It's cozy. It's literally like this, like, I kind of forget what it looks like now. I think it was like literally logs. But it was on this ski mountain in New Hampshire. It's in the White Mountains in New Hampshire. I forget the name of the mountain, but it's a mountain that it used to be a very active ski resort, but it shut down. And so a lot of the people that stayed or that had places on this mountain, they moved away. And it's like an abandoned ski mountain, but not spooky. Like there are still people that are there, but not that many. Anyways, they had this cabin, and so every winter, me, Nick, and Wolf, we would go up to this cabin, and we would stay there for like a long weekend, and we would snowboard at the mountains in the area, which were much, much better than Blue Hills, and it was awesome. Also, before we kind of dive into this, I'm going to be giving weirdly specific information, and people will probably laugh at this, about like the layout of this cabin. Just go with it, okay? It all plays a role. So every time we went to this cabin in New Hampshire, it was always me, Nick, Wolf, and it was Nick's mom and dad. And his mom and dad were like the happiest couple. I mean, they were like the perfect couple. Their kids were all grown, but they were just happy as can be. And their happy place, so to speak, was up at this cabin in New Hampshire, and not just when they would take us kids to go snowboarding. They went up there all the time. This was like their second home. And so just my memory of going on these trips to this cabin, it always involved the dynamic of me, Nick, Wolf, and Nick's mom and Nick's dad. And so in 2004, when I'm 16, in like, I think it was right near Christmas, I think it was in December, Nick's father unfortunately passed away somewhat suddenly. And, you know, right away, me and Wolf got in touch with each other, and this is going to sound kind of callous, but it really wasn't. It was like, are we going to go on this trip or not now? Because we were scheduled to go on this trip, I want to say like in a couple of weeks or something. It was like coming up. And so obviously we're feeling so bad for Nick and his family, but there's also like should we just assume that this is off or not? And we were kind of thinking that we're just not going to bring it up. It's not our place. If it happens, you know, it happens, but we're going to leave it alone. But, you know, sure enough, Nick, who to his credit, he's like one of the most stoic people I've ever met. He called us and he was like, hey, you know, it's obviously a really hard time right now, but me and my mom would still really love to go to the cabin with you guys. We still want to do the trip. And, you know, Wolf and I actually had a sidebar conversation after Nick told us this. And, you know, we're like, I guess we're just going to go with it. You know, think of it as almost like it's not really about us going snowboarding. It's more like an opportunity to help this family kind of do something that might take their mind off of what's just happened. Or because this is like a special place for their family relative to their father, their husband who's just passed, you know, maybe they want to go there because, you know, they've just lost this person. And so we were just like ready to kind of go with it, and it was going to be whatever it was going to be. Or so I thought. And so we end up going on this trip. I think it was in December. Anyways. And right away, in the car, making our way up to this cabin, everything felt wrong. That's the word I would use. It's me, it's Wolf, it's Nick, same as always, but like really conspicuously missing in the car, literally, is Nick's father. He always sat in the front passenger seat. In fact, no one sat in the front passenger seat in like silent reverence to the fact that he wasn't here anymore. And so it was like this really strained drive. No one talked about it. There was like the elephant in the room is like they've suffered this horrible loss, but we're just not going to really talk about it. And, you know, Wolf and I are certainly not going to bring it up. And so we make it up to New Hampshire, and, you know, the ride was whatever it was. And frankly, we weren't like hung up on it. It was just I'm recalling the way it made me feel. And so we get to the cabin. And so here's the part where I'm going to describe the cabin in like weird specificity, but it all plays a role. So you just got to go with it. So again, this cabin, it's not very big, and it's on a mountain, right? And if you think about how a mountain works, it's sloped. And in order to have any sort of living structure or a structure you can be in to be level, you need to build the house, the cabin, whatever, effectively on stilts, where, you know, one part of the house is put up on stilts because it's protruding off of the slope, and then the other part of the house, you almost have to like dig into the mountain so it fits in the mountain. So that's one part that's kind of important. You need to imagine how a cabin would literally be built on a mountain. There's those stilts. And for this cabin, as you drive up this very steep road that leads up to their cabin, you go straight up and then you make a left and you're kind of like on the slope, right? Like you're driving sideways onto their driveway. And right in front of you is the cabin, right at the end of the driveway. And as you're looking at it, you know, if you're in the driveway, to your right is the side of the mountain. That's the side that the cabin is in. To the left is the stilted area of this cabin. And there's a wraparound porch, which you're going to hear like 50 times, the words wraparound porch, that goes the whole kind of, you know, 180 of the side of the cabin that's on the stilted area, if that makes sense. I wish I had a diagram to show you. So house on stilts, wraparound porch, where the wraparound section, the part that you literally walk on, it's on stilts. And so that's important because if you're walking on the wraparound porch, you can hear those footsteps really easily. It makes like an echoey sound. So more details here. Once you go into the house, so you pull in the driveway, you're on a slant, you step onto this wraparound porch, and basically right on the side of the house that you're facing in the driveway, there's a door. You do need to step on the wraparound porch and take a couple of steps, but right there on the side of the house is the door. And so when you open the door, which opens inwardly, there is sleigh bells that are on the inside of the house on the door. So anytime you open it, you hear those bells ringing. And then if you were to step into the cabin, you take one step in, you'd be straddling the kitchen, very small kitchen on your right side with linoleum floors. And then on your left side, under your left foot is like, I think it was like red shag carpet. It was like the dining room. I think everything was designed in like the 1970s, but it's super cozy. It was like this awesome cabin. And so again, the dining room's on your left, kitchen's on your right, and there's no wall between them. There's just like a carpet linoleum divide running between your legs. If you walked from the door straight into the cabin, so again, kitchen on your right, dining room on your left, straight ahead, you would eventually reach, it's not a big distance, but you'd eventually reach this living room area where there's just like a TV and a couch, typical living room. And if you were standing in this living room and you turned around and looked up, you'd see there's a lofted section of this living room. And so up there is where Nick's mom and dad would always sleep. And then also, one other last bit here, going back to the front door, you go in the cabin, your right foot's in the kitchen, left foot's on the dining room. You're walking straight as if you're going to go into that living room area where this lofted area is. But if you stop short, basically like the center of the cabin, if you will, and you look to your right, there is a single hallway. And this hallway, remember how the building is built on a mountain. This hallway leads into the mountain, okay? Like picture it in your head, the hallway is going into the mountain. That hallway goes straight to the edge of this house. There's no windows on this side because you're in the mountain. And it bends to the left, and there's one door with a flimsy wooden door, and that door leads to the bedroom where me, Nick, and Wolf would always stay. In the bedroom where we stayed, which is in the mountain, there's no windows, okay? You walk in, and it's a corner-fed, that's a military term, it's a corner-fed room, where the door is tucked up on the edge of the room. So if the room is like this, the door is tucked up in the corner. If you open the door up and you stepped in, immediately on your right would be the foot of a bunk bed. And me and Wolf slept in that bunk bed. He'd be on the top, I'd be on the bottom, and our feet would be closest to the door. Like it's right against your hand, right when you walk in. You could grab our feet, basically. And then if you walked into the room a little bit farther, the rest of the space, I mean, this is a pretty small room, the rest of the space is taken up with a slightly bigger than twin size bed. I think it might have been queen size, but a pretty big bed that was just kind of slap dab, that's even a slack, whatever, in the middle of this bedroom. And that's where Nick would sleep. And there was just enough room between the queen size bed and the bunk beds to walk, between the two. And so Nick would sleep in the queen, I'm in the bottom bunk, Wolf's in the top. And then the very, very last thing would be if you go back into the living room where the lofted area is, there was just a flight of stairs that obviously went up to the second floor that would be reached in the living room area. Okay, that's a ton of explaining, but you'll see why all of that really, really matters as we get into this. So, we get up to the cabin. We arrived, mid-morning, mid-afternoon or something. It was like midday on this first day. And, it was a strained ride getting up there. It was a little bit difficult with the new dynamic. We put some of our stuff in the house, in the cabin, and then right away we just grabbed our snowboarding stuff, and Nick's mom drove us, because we didn't have our licenses, drove us to one of the mountains, and we went riding for the day. And it was great. It was, on a real mountain for the first time, that season, because normally we're in the Blue Hills Mountain. And, it was great. And so we decided that it was so great, the three of us, that we actually want to just call it early, like stop, because we have more days of riding ahead. And we would rather stop now, go home, back to the cabin, get a good night's sleep, and get up super early the next day and hit the mountain, all day and have just a killer day the next day. I remember Wolf was always the guy that wanted to do stuff like that. Like, let's get a good night's sleep and we'll get after it tomorrow. And so we decided to do that. And so we called Nick's mom. She picks us up. She brings us back to the cabin. It was like relatively early, 5 or something. And, even though our intention was to get in bed and go to sleep, we didn't do that. We went into the bedroom, the bedroom where we were, with the beds and the bunk beds. And we just started like gaming. We played like PlayStation. And so we're up like all night, just not sleeping at all. But eventually, Wolf, he went to sleep. He's in the top bunk. Nick, he fell asleep. He's on the bed in the middle of the room. And I'm the last one up. And it didn't really dawn on me that I was the last one up. I was just like busy playing whatever snowboarding video game I was playing. We were playing a Grand Theft Auto 3. I actually remember this. Anyway, so I'm playing that game, and I realized, oh shoot, it's like, 11:30, 12 o'clock at night. I got to go to bed, obviously. So I power off the PlayStation. I climb into my bed, and again, the room is in the mountain. Okay, there's no windows. This cabin is on an abandoned. It's a ski resort that doesn't get used anymore. So there's really not many neighbors at all. There's no street lights. I mean, you're in the woods to a degree. This is a very dark bedroom. Like, there's a difference between being in a dark bedroom and being in a pitch black room. And so this room was pretty close to being pitch black. There was no ambient sound. There was one little light, which actually seemed huge now that I remember it, or when I'm thinking about it. And there was a digital clock, which was important because it was a reference point for me. Kind of in the back corner from where I was laying, I could see this digital clock. But that was the only light in the room. And so I get in bed at like 11:30, 12 o'clock. Nick and Wolf are passed out. And I was doing that thing where when you can't sleep and you know you've been up for a while and you really need to go to bed, you start counting like, okay, well, if I fall asleep now, you're looking at the clock, I'll get, 4.5 hours of sleep. Like, that's plenty of sleep. And then you're like, 20, 30 minutes go by, you still haven't fallen asleep. You're checking the clock again. You're like, okay, well, if I fall asleep in like 10 minutes, I'm going to get like 3 hours of sleep. That's enough. That's enough. So I'm having one of those nights where I cannot sleep. I'm not scared in any way. There's nothing happening. It's just I can't sleep. I'm just laying there. I'm laying in the bed, and around 3 a.m., I can't sleep. Last point. Over this weekend, we were told that Nick's two older brothers, he had two much older brothers who were in their 30s, were 16, they were going to potentially swing by the cabin for 1 or 2 nights. We didn't know when. They worked for a snowboarding company, and they had crazy hours. And so it was like this unpredictable thing that they might be swinging by. I didn't know either of the brothers. Wolf didn't know them. We knew they existed, but that's just something to put out there. So I'm laying in bed. It's 3 a.m. And I hear footsteps on the wraparound porch. I could hear them clear as day. There was nothing wrong with hearing this because right away my head is like, oh, it's got to be, one of Nick's brothers are here. Or maybe I'm just hearing something, like something, maybe it's an animal, I don't know. But I'm laying in this bed and I hear these footsteps out on the wraparound porch. Just a couple of footsteps, not fast, not slow, just kind of methodical. Then I hear the door to the house open. And I know I hear it open because the door has sleigh bells on it. So the door opens and I hear the sleigh bells, which is a really distinct sound. Doors open. And then I hear a pot fall in the kitchen because the pot, or what sounded like a pot, landed on the linoleum. And if you've ever heard that sound, that's also kind of a dull thud, but it's a unique thud. So I hear these sounds. I said it in one of the earlier stories, and I'll say it again because it plays a big role in this one. When you are in extremis, let's say, when you're in situations that are truly extreme, and I've been in a handful in my life, your brain will do everything it can to tell you that everything is okay. You will rationalize things that can't be rationalized. You will convince yourself that nothing is happening. It's a survival mechanism. I think other people have it's a quicker fuse to get rid of that, but it's totally survival. I was completely convinced with no worry at all that when I heard these first sounds that I was hearing one of Nick's brothers. And that was a safe judgment call to make. Except that I didn't hear a car approach. It's 3 a.m, and it is odd that they would show up now. But that's what I'm telling myself. So I'm not panicked. I'm thinking this is fine. I'm laying in bed. Our door is shut to our bedroom. It's totally dark, minus this red clock. Just thinking to myself, okay, if this is one of Nick's brothers, and for some reason he were to come in here, I don't want to talk to him. I don't know him. You're going through this process in your head, and I'm like, if for some reason he comes in here, I'll just pretend to be asleep because I don't want to have my first interaction with this person now. And so I'm like telling myself, okay, you're gonna pretend to be asleep here in a minute if he comes in here. But I hear those footsteps, the door opens, I hear sleigh bells, the pot falls. The footsteps that I heard out on the wraparound porch continued into the house. And I say that because when you're walking on the wraparound porch, it makes sense you would hear footsteps. It's hollow. I mean, you're on stilts. In the house, it's like a concrete slab with a shag carpet. There ain't no echo when you're walking around the cabin. You don't hear anything. But when this thing walked into the cabin, I heard footsteps as if they were on something hollow in the house. Footsteps wrap around porch, door opens, sleigh bells, pot falls, footsteps continue into the house. Right away, my brain is telling me it's fine. Those footsteps are approaching me. It's coming into the house. The door's not shut. It's winter in the middle of New Hampshire. I haven't heard a car, but it's okay. It's got to be Nick's brother. It's got to be Nick's brother. I hear these footsteps walking through this cabin. It doesn't make sense at all. It's not possible to be making the sounds this was making. I admit at this point I was starting to second guess that this could be Nick's brother. Mostly, honestly, because the door was still open. That was what I was fixated on, more than the sounds of the footsteps. It was the door being open. How could you just leave it open? There's animals. It's cold. The footsteps continue through the cabin. Slow, methodical, not in a rush. And they come to a stop in the middle of the cabin. And they turn and begin walking down the one hallway that leads to our bedroom. And so I'm hearing these footsteps coming down the hallway. And I'm trying to tell myself, it's got to be Nick's brother. It's got to be. Who else could it be? The footsteps stop. They turn again because there's a slight turn that leads to our door, which is shut. The footsteps come to a stop right outside the door. I've never been in a situation where I've had an intruder in my house, but I can tell you it's besides this moment I'm saying, there's a special kind of fear reserved for when you think you could die. If you've never felt it before, you don't know what it's like. When the footsteps stopped outside the door was probably the first time that I thought, wait a minute, this could be someone else. The door's open. What's going on here? The door opens, and remember, I'm laying in the bottom bunk. Nick and Wolf are asleep. From my perspective, if I'm looking down at the foot of the bed, there's a gap between the top bunk and my bunk. I can see through it. It leads, to the wall. So if anybody came in the room, I would see them enter the room. The door opened. It stresses me out thinking about it. I'm sure you can tell in my voice. The door opened, and I kid you not, something darker than dark. The room is pitch black, besides this digital clock. I made out a silhouette as if it was bright, walking into the room at the foot of the bed. However, this silhouette was so tall that from my obscured perspective, where I wouldn't be able to see anybody's upper half, because of the top bunk blocking my view, I could tell that its hips of this silhouette, this dark figure, were above the top bunk from my perspective. It's not human. It's not human. The level of fear that I felt at this moment, I can only describe as primal, paralyzed. I actually believed there was a very real chance I could have a heart attack from what I was seeing. The figure walks into the room, and I hear the footsteps in the room. Walks past the foot of the bed. My view is still obscured because of the top bunk, even on my right side. This thing makes a sort of like military facing movement, like you see, soldiers make those sudden movements. It walks past the foot of the bed, it makes that facing movement and begins walking down the aisle between Nick's bed and the bunk bed. It's so tall, I can only see the legs, or whatever it is. And all I'm thinking to myself is, for the love of God, whatever this is, don't interact with me. Don't look at me. Don't do anything to me. I'm completely frozen in the position I'm in. I can't even, I was worried if I moved my eyes too quickly, I would alert this thing, and it would interact with me. It sounds so silly, but I literally was like, that will ruin my life. My life will end the second that happens. This thing walks down the aisle it stands right next to my head, and I can't even look at it. So worried I'm making a sound. And this thing stops right next to me, and it does another facing movement, but away from me. So now it's facing over Nick's bed. And then it sort of bows forward, almost like literally bowing into Nick. And out of my peripheral, I'm seeing this, and it just kind of disappears. Now, in the movie, in a movie, you would think, oh, well, now the ghost has disappeared into the floor. Now's your chance, John. Get up and run. Go tell someone. It's not how it happens. You're not thinking the ghost's gone now. The coast is clear. I'm thinking, where is it? It's obviously in the room. It didn't disappear into Nick. It didn't disappear anywhere. It's here. All night, I laid in bed. I've never been able to move. I was as still as you could be. I was sweating profusely from the effort I was putting into remaining still, believe it or not. I literally kept my eyes stationary to avoid making noise. Primal fear. Never experienced anything like it besides multiple more times this weekend. At some point, call it 5, 6 in the morning, I hear, I didn't see anything that night. This thing has disappeared. 5, 6 in the morning, I hear what sounds like Nick's mom making her way downstairs to go make coffee. And by this point, the wave of relief I'm feeling is, it was like I was saved. Like literally, I'm going to live now. That's the level of relief I'm feeling. And so I didn't spring out of bed and run. I'm still very worried about what's happening, but I get out of bed pretty quickly and I make my way out into the dining room where Nick's mom was. Now, it's easy to think that at this point I should have been very candid with Nick's mom about everything I experienced. For example, was the door open when you came down here? Was there a pot on the ground? Like the obvious signs of something having happened here. But in my head, as soon as I got out there, all I was thinking is, I don't know if I can bring this up to Nick's mom. Because no matter how I talk about what's happened, it's going to connect to this idea of there being like a ghost in the house. I'm going to bring this up to Nick's mom, who's literally just lost her husband. It just felt so inappropriate to suggest that there was something haunting this house. And so initially, when I walked out there, I had a plan for how I'm going to bring this up. But as soon as I saw her just having a nice morning, everything looks normal, she's making coffee, I was like, I can't do it. I sat down at the dining room table, and I think it was pretty obvious that I was having an issue. Something was wrong. I wasn't saying anything to her, but it was pretty clear that Nick's mom had picked up that something was wrong with John. Something's wrong. But I'm struggling to find a way to talk about this because, again, I just was so worried about being inappropriate. And that may sound silly, but trust me, it was just the timing of things. It just felt totally wrong to bring it up. But eventually, what I did say, and I thought this was very clever at the time, is I said, hey, did one of your sons, Nick's older brothers, did they stop by last night? And Nick's mom said, no, they didn't. They could tonight. We're not sure, but they didn't. I must have given off a obvious reaction of disappointment because I was really hoping that this could all just be solved with, oh yeah, they stopped by last night. That's what it was. And so I'm sitting there at the kitchen table and I'm struggling with what she's told me. And she says, John, she comes over to me and she goes, John, don't worry. I heard my husband here last night too. That was one of the worst things I've ever heard in my life. The idea that I've experienced something that is so terrible that even now, 18 years later, is difficult to talk about. That Nick's mom the adult, is effectively confirming that this horrible thing that's happened to me is her dead husband, I can only say that my thought at the moment was, I can't talk to her. I can't have this conversation. I cannot do this. I cannot have this conversation. I wanted nothing more. No offense to her at all. She's a wonderful woman. I wanted nothing to do with her. This was not relieving. I wasn't ready to be told that you heard whatever you heard. And so I dismissed virtually everything she said after that. I went into a shell. I think she tried to empathize with me and say it was okay, that he's not going to hurt you, that kind of thing. I don't really remember. It was so shocking that she said that. And so eventually Nick and Wolf, they wake up. It wasn't long after that. And when they came out of the hallway into the dining room, I had the same reservations I had with Nick's mom about bringing up what happened because of like the inappropriateness, which now obviously things have changed since what she said. But I still had that feeling that it felt wrong to like, hey guys, let me tell you what happened last night, just out of respect to Nick. But I did pull Wolf aside that morning. Nick came out, he got a cup of coffee, Nick's mom's doing her thing, and I pulled Wolf aside, and I said, I told him what happened. I was very shaken up by it because I couldn't fathom the idea that this really happened, because I'm telling myself that maybe it was a dream. Wolf tells me, dude, like, gotta be honest, I don't know what the deal is with Nick's mom, but she's grieving. For all we know, she's just kind of saying that. I don't know. It's probably just a bad dream. You know what I mean? It's probably what it is. That was reassuring to me. Hearing someone that was telling me, don't worry about it, it was like, okay. And so that was the end of the conversations in the morning, for the most part. I did tell both Wolf and Nick that night coming up, I said, will you do me a favor and just allow me to fall asleep ahead of you? I didn't sleep last night. I don't know what happened, but just allow me the courtesy of falling asleep first, then you guys fall asleep. And they said, no problem. So anyways, we go snowboarding for the day. Awesome day. One of the best days of snowboarding I've ever had. And over the course of the day, I was thinking a lot about what happened, and I was telling myself that, whatever happened likely was sleep paralysis or something, maybe like a super visceral dream or something. And whatever Nick's mom has said to me, I still, to be honest, I guess I'm giving something away. I don't know what to make of what she said, to be honest. I think that there's a case to be made that she had just lost the man she loved the most. It's not shocking that someone could potentially make something like that up, like picking up on the idea that I've had some sort of experience and just kind of latching onto it and going with it to pretend that your husband is here, his ghost is here. So I'm telling myself all day while I'm writing that this is explainable. This is not a ghost. This is not paranormal. This is normal. This is a dream. And so I come home. We go back to the cabin, I should say. And we got back, 5 or 6 o'clock, whatever it was. And I'm in a good mood, and I'm just like tired, and I'm just ready to go to bed. Mostly because I just want to get through the night, as fast as I can. And so I climb in bed. The dudes, Wolf and Nick, they're gaming, and I climbed in bed right away. Tucked myself in. It's time to go to bed. But again, I couldn't sleep. Probably because I was just, from the second I got in there, I was thinking, you better fall asleep as fast as you can so you don't have these issues. But I didn't fall asleep. And as much as I tried over the course of the entire evening to tell Nick and Wolf, please, please don't go to bed. Let me fall asleep. At some point it was like midnight again, and they're exhausted. They've tried to stay up, but they just can't. And they don't really understand what the big issue is, and Wolf to a degree, but they're kind of like, bro, like, go to bed. And so finally they fall asleep. And so once again, I'm laying in this bedroom. Everybody in the house is asleep. It's super dark. There's just this little light from the digital clock. And again, I'm just so upset that I haven't fallen asleep. I'm counting the hours. And I remember as the clock got closer and closer to like 2, 3 in the morning, I was like, please don't let whatever happened the night before happen again.